Hello friends and foes of Middle-earth and welcome back. Today we celebrate Hobbit Day on the 22nd of September, the birthday of both Bilbo and Frodo. And for that reason, I thought it would be fitting to talk about Bilbo and his life before the events in The Hobbit. It's actually a topic I've rarely heard anyone talk about, and it's not because his life was totally uneventful before that. Trust me. So lean back, smoke a pipe and drink some tea as we explore Bilbo's life before The Hobbit. Bilbo was born in 2890 of the Third Age, or 1290 by Shire reckoning. Bilbo was actually born only 11 years later than Gimli, something that might put things in perspective. He was the son and only child of Bungo Baggins and Belladonna Took. He was much like his father Bungo. In fact, he was so much alike in looks and behavior that Bilbo seemed like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father. Belladonna Took was from the wealthy Took family and daughter of Geraint's Took, more commonly known as the Old Took. Geraint was the 26th Thane of the Shire, but we will get back to him later in the story. Belladonna was one of 3 remarkable daughters of the Old Took, as we can read in The Hobbit. A funny side note here is that Humphrey Carpenter tried to draw an analogy between Bilbo and Tolkien, as Tolkien's mother Mabel Suffield was one of 3 remarkable daughters as well. So perhaps Belladonna Took was at least in some ways inspired by Tolkien's own mother. Around 10 years before Bilbo was born, Bungo and Belladonna built Baggins in Hobbiton. Baggins was a smeel built into the hill, as it's called. The whole was largely financed by Belladonna Took, but built by Bungo. Probably not alone though. The earth removed was shot over the edge of the sudden fall in the hillside onto the ground. This lane would thenceforth be known as Backshot Row, the same street where the Gamgees would later live in number 3. In both the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy, we can see the paintings of Bungo and Belladonna above the fireplace inside Baggins. The painting of Bungo Baggins is actually meant to look like a young Peter Jackson, while Belladonna portrays his wife, Bran Walsh. A fine little detail you might have missed. Bungo was quite fond of either remembering or coining proverbs. Bilbo quoted his father's sayings, "Third time pays for all," before making his first descent into Erebor, and "While there's life, there's hope," when leading the dwarves down to Smaug's lair. In the Fellowship of the Ring film, there's actually a neat little reference to Bungo Baggins. Bilbo says that some of the bottles of old vineyards were laid down by his father in 1296, almost as old as Bilbo himself. It is actually lore accurate that Bungo laid down some bottles of old vineyards in the cellar, but the year is unknown. But I think it's an interesting detail, as it's done both in Shire reckoning, and it gives us an idea that Bilbo is quite old, if you know the timeline at least. Several of these bottles of old vineyards would be given to Rorimac Brandybuck after Bilbo's farewell party, and some by the small party that Frodo gave before leaving Baggins. During his youth, Bilbo attended several parties, during which he loved to listen to Gandalf's stories about dragons, goblins and princesses. Like most hobbits, he was impressed by the wizard's fireworks at the Old Took's Midsummer Eve parties. Gandalf was a friend of the Old Took and gave him a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered. Before his adventures, Bilbo was considered a very prim and respectable hobbit. Bilbo had blood from 2 important hobbit families, the Bagginses and the Tooks. Because of his adventurous Tookish side, Bilbo was rather restless and strange for a hobbit, something that was sometimes conflicting with his stay-at-home Baggins side. The strangeness would only increase in the eyes of other hobbits after his return from Erebor, where some people would even call him Mad Baggins. But all was not good and peaceful through Bilbo's early life. In 2911 of the Third Age, the Fell Winter occurred. It is not to be confused with the Fell Winter of the First Age, nor the Long Winter, where Helm Hammerhand defended Southberg from the Dunlendings. The Fell Winter of 2911 to 2912 would be remembered as an extremely cold and long-lasting winter in Middle-earth. The winter began in November, but unlike previous winters, Sauron did not have the strength to take advantage of it. The winter was also less harsh than the Long Winter, and snow and ice stopped in Eriadu at the Greyflood River and in Wilderland in the middle of Mirkwood. Nevertheless, there were severe problems in the Shire. Bilbo was 21 when the winter began. In The Lord of the Rings, we are actually reminded of the winter by Sam as the company tries to climb Caradhras. Except on the high moors of the North Farthing, a heavy fall was rare in the Shire and was regarded as a pleasant event and a chance for fun. No living hobbit could remember the fell winter of 1311, when the White Wolves invaded the Shire over the frozen Brandywine. The winter caused starvation in the Shire, and Gandalf and the Rangers had to aid the hobbits and bring them food. This harsh winter was quite a surprise for the hobbits that were totally unprepared. The Old Took played a key part in this and most likely coordinated many things with Gandalf, who was also in contact with the Rangers, likely led by Arconui, who was chieftain of the Dunedain at the time. He was quite old though, in 2911, so it's possible that his son Arador played an important role in the events as well. Arador is the grandfather of Aragorn, but we will get back to him later. White wolves from the far north had come down to Eriador, likely seeking food. There was not only a problem in the Shire, but most of the north was rather desolate, and thus the wolves most likely tried to enter the Shire, where there was plenty of fat hobbits to eat. They crossed the frozen Brandywine River, and the hobbits of Buckland sounded the horn call of Buckland, which would not be heard again until the events in The Lord of the Rings, when the Black Riders are spotted. The wolves crossed into East Farthing, and the Rangers no doubt played a key part in hunting down the wild beasts. If Gandalf and the Rangers had not helped the hobbits and provided them food, many would have starved to death, or perhaps been eaten by wolves. And for that reason Gandalf and the Dunedain actually saved the Shire, though it's something that's rarely mentioned. It's never stated that someone specific died during the winter, but still I found something interesting that I want to share with you. There were 3 Bagginses that died during the winter. Bungo Baggins in 2911, he was an uncle to Bungo Baggins. Likewise his brother Largo and his sister Lily died in 2912. Largo Baggins is actually the great-grandfather of Frodo Baggins. It should be noted though that all 3 of them were in their 90s when they died, so it could simply be of old age. Still, I find it equally likely that they might have gotten sick because of the harsh winter. We can never know for certain, of course, but I felt it was an interesting theory to share with you all. Bilbo probably didn't play an important part during the winter, but it sure affected his life, and was the worst thing that had happened to the Shire since the Battle of Greenfields in 2747, when orcs from Mount Graham attacked the Shire. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the story about the bull roar and how he knocked off the head of Golfin Bull, and thus invented golf, another tale for another day. The point is that the fell winter must have been talked about for a long time afterwards, and perhaps it also opened up Bilbo's eyes even more to the idea that the world outside of the Shire might have been bigger than he thought at first. In March 2912, the snow began to melt, but this caused new problems in Eriador. Great floods of meltwater rushed down Greyflood, and the city of Tarbad was ruined and deserted by the Dunlendings that had lived there. The people of Enedwaith also suffered greatly, as their lands were flooded. This no doubt also led to hunger in their lands. The chieftain Argonui died the same year, but it's likely unrelated to the winter. Nonetheless, his son Arador became the new chieftain of the Dunedain of the North. After the fell winter, peace was restored in the Shire. The Old Took died in 2920, the same year Frodo's mother Primula was born. The new Thane was Isengrim Took III. 6 years later, in 2926, Bungo Baggins died at the age of 80. Sam's father Hamfast Gamgee was actually born that same year. Bilbo would continue to live in Bag End with his mother after this. Quite a lot of stuff happened to the Dunedain after this. In 2930, Chieftain Arador was killed by hill trolls in the Coldfells, north of Rivendell. His son Arathorn II became the new chieftain hereafter. The year prior, he had wedded Gilrain, daughter of Dirhael, and Eowyn, both of whom had the gift of foresight. Dirhael foresaw that Arathorn's life would be short-lived and opposed the marriage. Her mother, Eowyn, perceived that hope would be born from their marriage for the people of the Dunedain. Arathorn and Gilrain married despite the warnings, and the following year Aragorn was born on the 1st of March 2931. Dirhael's prophecy would prove true. In 2933, only 3 years after he became chieftain, Arathorn went hunting for orcs with Elladan and Elrohir, the sons of Elrond. Here he was shot by an orc and hit in the eye. Gilrain took their son to Rivendell to be fostered by Elrond, where he was given the name Estel, and you know the rest of the story. If not, I will cover it eventually. I think this is the right moment to recommend you all to watch the fan film Born of Hope. I highly recommend it if you haven't watched it already. It actually tells the part about Arathorn and Gilrain quite good. It is of course a fan film, so keep that in mind. The year after Arathorn's death, Belladonna Took died of old age, at the age of 82. Bilbo would then live alone in Bag End. He was 44 at this time. Bilbo also employed Holman Greenhand, a well-known fine gardener in Hobbiton. At some point Holman took on his nephew, Humfast Gamgee, as an apprentice. They would both attend the Garden of Bag End. Now we have come to 2941, the year where the quest of Erebor began. Bilbo was 50, turning 51 in September, the same age Frodo had when he left the Shire. One morning of that spring, Gandalf visited Bag End, but found its master Bilbo Baggins not at home. Holman informed him that Bilbo had gone on one of his walks, as it was the new year of the elves, called Yestare. It began the first day of spring, the renewal of nature. In the Shire reckoning, this would be around April 6. Holman's description of Bilbo convinced Gandalf he had indeed found the perfect man, or hobbit rather, for his mission. Gandalf would then return one morning and talk to Bilbo, and the rest is history, as they say. One final note you might not know though. As Bilbo returned from his adventure, he found that Bag End and his possessions was auctioned away by Messrs. Grubb, and Burrows. Holman and Humfast had their hands full in making sure the garden wasn't trampled, as the place was swarming with hobbits, hoping to get a piece of the Baggins estate. Bilbo bought back his own things and settled once more peacefully into Bag End. And here ends our little adventure for today. I always love to dive into the more unknown stories of Tolkien, and thought it was a perfect way to celebrate Hobbit Day. Let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you continue your own adventure the rest of the day. There are many other excellent Tolkien channels that have published videos today, so I highly recommend you to check them out as well. And now there's only one thing left to say. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and maybe watch this video next. Farewell till next time.